the wholesome reader here, continuing chapter 9 of Father to Nobody's Children, The Little Match Boy. The dream that resulted in the girls' village is only one of many instances of supernatural guidance and help in the life of Dr. Bernardo. Throughout his ministry, there were repeated evidences of God's hand on his work. Like George Mueller, an earlier pioneer in ministry to homeless children, Bernardo could name many times that the Lord provided food or money as a direct answer to prayer. Mueller, however, decided that as an act of faith, he should never ask for donations, but simply present the need to God alone. Bernardo admired and respected Mueller, and he didn't question Mueller's conviction, but he felt God was calling him to follow a different path. Bernardo brought every need to the Lord in prayer, yet he felt God wanted him to share the needs of his children's homes with his fellow Christians. He considered his ministry a privilege, and he felt it his responsibility to invite others to share in that privilege by giving. In fact, Bernardo often declared he had a special mission to the stingy. And yet, the most dramatic instances of giving were often unsought and unasked. One winter, for example, was unusually cold, and the children were shivering in their beds at night. Bernardo's heart was breaking over the situation. He knew he must get extra blankets, but he had no money, so he did the only thing he knew to do. He took the matter before God in prayer. After a painful night of watching his children suffer, Bernardo went to a wholesale supply house and picked out the blankets he wanted. The cost was almost £100, and since he had no money, he went away empty-handed. The next morning he received a letter from a pastor in another town who had included a check to pay the cost of additional warm clothing. The check was for £100. Later, in the growth of the homes, costs rose tremendously. At one point, it cost £200 per day just to feed the children. Unfortunately, though children have to eat every day, donors do not always remember to give as regularly. There were many periods when the donations received were just a fraction of what was needed. During one such period, giving had fallen to a dangerously low level. Dr. Bernardo spent many hours in prayer over the problem, but it appeared that God was not answering. Day after day went by with no relief in sight. One morning in May, as he sat in his office working, one of his assistants told him that he had a visitor. This was not unusual. He had many visitors every day. Most of the time, one of the assistants could handle the problem, but in this case, the woman insisted on speaking with the doctor personally. After taking care of a few urgent issues, Bernardo brought the unassuming woman into his office. Without even introducing herself, the woman said, "I have some money for you," and handed him a £1,000 bill. Bernardo had almost never received a donation of that size. He had rarely even seen a bill that large. He stood there dumbfounded, but the woman was not done. "I am familiar with your work, and I admire your cottages for girls." With that, she took a second £1,000 bill out of her purse and placed it in his hand. But still, she was not finished. "I am also pleased that you do not require your children in the cottages to wear uniforms," she added, and handed Bernardo a third £1,000 bill. When he could catch his breath, Bernardo said he assumed the donor would like a receipt, and asked if she would like to give him her name. "No, I would not," she replied. Before Bernardo could say anything else, she walked out the door, never to be seen again. Bernardo almost thought it was a dream, but it could not be. There were the 3 bills still in his hand. When 2 friends stopped by, he shared the story, and they joined him in praise to God for his provision. But while God provided for Bernardo and his children, he often used Bernardo to provide for others. One of the most dramatic examples is the story of Billy Ryan. One evening, Bernardo was hurrying home after a long board meeting when he was stopped by a small, high-pitched voice. "Matches, sir?" Looking down, Bernardo saw a small boy running to keep up with him. Holding up 2 boxes of matches, the child called out, "2 boxes a halfpenny, sir. Buy 'em, sir?" Then, apparently thinking Bernardo didn't like the price, he added hesitantly, "Could give yer 3 boxes, but there ain't much profit." Bernardo stopped and took a good look at the little salesman. Writing about it later, Bernardo described him as shoeless and stockingless, his bare feet well muddied, his trousers ragged, his jacket torn. Trousers and jacket were all he had to cover him from the drizzling rain and shivering fog. A queer little old patch cap was perched on one side of his head. The boy looked about 8 years old, but Bernardo guessed he was probably older. Most children as poor as this boy were half-starved and short for their age. The doctor smiled down on the young street vendor and asked him his name. "Billy, sir," the boy replied. "Billy Ryan." "Well, Billy, have you sold much today?" The boy shook his head sadly. "Only about 6 boxes, sir. That ain't much." "Who sent you out?" "Mother." "And why does your mother send out a little chap like you to sell matches on the street?" "Oh, she'd do it herself, sir, but she's awful sick." By asking a few more questions, Bernardo learned that Billy also had a sister. "She's littler than me, lots littler," he said, and they lived in a single room of a tumble-down house not far away. Since his mother was ill and his sister was too young to be out on the street, Billy had taken on the job of being the breadwinner for the family. "Why don't you take me to see your mother?" Bernardo suggested. "I am a doctor, you know, and perhaps I can do her some good." So off to his humble home Billy took this friendly stranger. He led his visitor up a creaky flight of stairs and ran into a back room. Bernardo waited politely outside the door. A few minutes later the door opened and a weak voice said, "Come in, sir." There was not a stick of furniture in the room, yet the floor was very clean. The whole room, in fact, was neat and tidy. Obviously, the family cared about their little home, humble as it was. The doctor described the place as having a marvelous air of peace and even comfort, despite the fact that there was no place to sit down. In a makeshift bed in the middle of the floor lay Billy's mother. Billy's sister, a bright-eyed little 6-year-old named Bess, stood by her side. When Bernardo said he was a doctor and asked how he might be able to help, the feeble woman told her story. Mrs. Ryan was a widow and had earned a modest living for herself and her children as a cleaning woman in the city. But one day she had injured her leg, and the wound would not heal. As the leg grew worse and worse, she soon became bedridden and unable to keep her job. Bernardo listened to the brave woman's story with sympathy, then, after checking her leg wound, suggested she go to the hospital. "What would become of the children?" she asked. "Billy might do all right for a while by himself. He's a brave lad. But little Bess—" And she broke down into tears. Bernardo was sorry he had made the suggestion. "Well, then," Bernardo said gently, "why not try to get the children into some home or refuge while you are taken to a hospital and properly treated?" At this the woman's eyes lit up. "Ah, yes, sir, that's what I would like to do, but I don't know how to go about it. But look here, sir." Then from under her pillow she took a leaflet and handed it to Bernardo. "Read that, sir," she said eagerly. "I have been hoping and praying that God would let Billy and Bess get in there. I know they're safe together, and then I'd go cheerfully to the hospital." Bernardo looked down at the paper in his hand. It was one of his own leaflets. The woman had been praying to get her children into Dr. Bernardo's homes. With a humbling awareness that his visit was a direct answer to prayer, he replied, "My name is Bernardo, and if you are willing, I would be glad to take care of Billy and Bess until you get well." In amazement, Mrs. Ryan called her children to her side. "Billy, Bess, this is the gentleman who has all the little boys and girls. I told you God would hear me, and now he's just sent him here to take and keep you both until I am well." Stories such as Mrs. Ryan's were a great encouragement to Dr. Bernardo, that God had placed his blessing on his work. That encouragement helped sustain him through one of the stormiest times in his life, a period in which Bernardo's enemies threatened to destroy his entire ministry. And that's the end of chapter 9.